Some people are afraid of the dark. Some are afraid of tight spaces. But there's something far worse than any of that. It's the moment you realize you're alone in a place where you shouldn't be, and something around you knows it too. These three stories come from real people who were left behind, and what happened to them after everyone else was gone is something they'll never forget. My parents split up when I was 15, and by the time I turned 19, I was used to bouncing between two houses. My mom lived in a small ranch-style home on the outskirts of a quiet town in Ohio. My dad had moved about 2 hours away to a bigger city for work. That summer, my mom told me she'd be traveling for 3 weeks to visit my aunt in Arizona. She asked if I wanted to come, but I had just started a new job at a warehouse and couldn't take time off. She didn't love the idea of leaving me alone, but I was 19. I told her I'd be fine. And honestly, for the first week, I was. The house was old, but comfortable. It sat on about half an acre, with a large backyard that backed up against a thin stretch of woods. There were neighbors on both sides, but the one to the left was an elderly couple I barely ever saw, and the one to the right had been vacant for months, with a for sale sign slowly fading in the yard. So, it was quiet. Really quiet. About 5 days into being alone, I started noticing small things. A kitchen cabinet I was sure I'd closed would be slightly open when I came downstairs in the morning. The back door, which had a tricky lock, seemed looser than usual. I blamed it on the house being old. These things happen when the foundation settles. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Then one night, around 11, I was sitting on the couch watching a movie when I heard a single, heavy thud from somewhere above me. It wasn't a creak. It wasn't the house settling. It was a thud, like someone had dropped a book on a hardwood floor. The problem was that there was no second floor. There was only the attic, and nobody had been up there in years. My mom used it to store Christmas decorations and old photo albums. That was it. I muted the TV and sat there, completely still, waiting to hear it again. Nothing. After about 10 minutes, I convinced myself it was probably an animal. A raccoon, maybe. They get into attics all the time. 2 days later, I came home from work, and something felt off the second I walked through the front door. I couldn't explain it at first. Everything looked normal. The lights were off, the TV was off, the kitchen was clean. But there was a smell. Faint, but noticeable, like body odor mixed with something damp. I walked through the house, checking every room. Nothing was out of place. I opened the windows and figured the smell would go away on its own. That night, I woke up at around 2 in the morning. I'm a heavy sleeper, so for me to wake up in the middle of the night, something has to pull me out of it. I lay there in the dark, and then I heard it. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing, coming from above the ceiling. Not from outside. Not from the walls. From directly above my bed. I held my own breath and listened. It was unmistakable. Someone was breathing up there. I grabbed my phone and got out of bed as quietly as I could. I didn't turn on any lights. I walked straight out the front door, got in my car, and drove to the nearest gas station. I called the police from the parking lot. 2 officers came to the house with me. I told them what I heard, and they searched the entire place. When one of them pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up with a flashlight, he came back down with a look on his face I'll never forget. He told me someone had been living up there. They found a sleeping bag, empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a small pile of clothes. Whoever it was had gotten in through a vent on the side of the house that had been partially pried open. The officers told me the person was gone, probably left while I was driving to the gas station. They never found who it was. My mom cut her trip short and came home 2 days later. We had the attic sealed, installed new locks on everything, and put up cameras around the property. But for the rest of that summer, I didn't sleep through a single night. Every creak, every sound from above sent my heart racing. I still think about it sometimes. Whoever that was, they were right above me, breathing, listening, maybe even watching through some gap in the ceiling I never found. And the worst part is, I'll never know how long they were there before I noticed. What happened to me is something I've only told a few people, because most of them don't believe me. They think I'm exaggerating, or that I imagined it. I didn't. Every detail of that night is burned into my memory, like a scar that never healed. I was 26 years old, and living in a two-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a small building in Denver. My girlfriend at the time, Kayla, had gone to visit her parents in Nebraska for the weekend. She left Friday morning and wasn't coming back until Sunday night. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, so I was used to spending long hours alone in the apartment. It never bothered me. I'm not the type of person who gets spooked easily. Or at least, I wasn't. Friday night was completely normal. I ordered pizza, played some video games, and went to bed around midnight. Saturday was uneventful too. I spent most of the day working on a project for a client. By the time evening rolled around, I was tired and decided to take a break. I made some dinner, cracked open a beer, and sat on the couch to watch something. Around 9, I got a text from Kayla asking how things were going. I told her everything was fine. That was the last normal moment of that weekend. At around 11:30, I heard a noise from the hallway outside the apartment. At first, I thought it was one of my neighbors coming home. The building had thin walls, and you could hear everything. Doors opening, footsteps, conversations. But this sound was different. It was slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped right outside my front door. Then nothing. I waited. After a minute or so, I figured someone had just paused to check their phone or grab their keys. I went back to watching my show. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps approaching the door, then stopping. This time, I muted the TV and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty corridor through that tiny lens, and something about the stillness made my skin crawl. I locked the deadbolt, which I usually forgot to do, and went back to the couch. I fell asleep on the couch sometime after midnight. I woke up to a sound that made my blood freeze. It was the doorknob. Someone was slowly turning my doorknob, testing it, seeing if it would open. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't a break-in attempt. It was careful, patient, like whoever was doing it didn't want to make noise. The knob turned one way, then back, then again. Then it stopped. I was lying on the couch, my eyes locked on the door, not moving, barely breathing. Then I heard something I will never be able to explain. A voice, low and muffled, coming from the other side of the door. It said my name, not my last name, my first name. Whispered, but clear enough that I knew exactly what I heard. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. I just lay there on the couch, staring at the door, my phone clutched in my hand, too paralyzed to even dial. Eventually, I texted Kayla. She called me immediately and told me to call the police. I did. By the time officers arrived, there was no one in the hallway. They checked the stairwells, the lobby, the parking lot. Nothing. They asked if I had any enemies, anyone who might want to intimidate me. I told them no. They suggested it might have been a drunk neighbor at the wrong door. But that didn't explain how they knew my name. I checked with every neighbor on my floor the next day. None of them had been in the hallway that night. None of them heard anything. The building didn't have security cameras in the hallways, only at the main entrance. When I reviewed the entrance footage with the building manager, we saw something that made my stomach drop. A man in a dark hoodie entered the building at 11:14 that night. He didn't buzz anyone. He waited near the entrance until another resident came in and slipped through behind them. He never left through the front door. The footage from the rest of the night showed no one exiting until the morning. Wherever he went, he found another way out, or he stayed. Kayla and I moved out 3 weeks later. I never felt safe there again. I still don't know who that person was, or how they knew my name. I try not to think about it, but on quiet nights, when I'm alone, Sometimes my mind drifts back to that doorknob, slowly turning, and that whisper coming through the crack in the door. I need to give a bit of background before I tell this story, because it's important to understand the setting. My grandparents owned a farmhouse about 40 minutes outside of a small town in rural Pennsylvania. When they passed away, the house went to my uncle, who never really did anything with it. He lived in another state and just let the property sit there. The plan was always to sell it eventually, but the market was bad, and nobody wanted a rundown farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. So the house just sat there, empty, slowly falling apart. When I was 23, my uncle asked me if I'd be willing to spend a week out there to do some basic cleaning and repairs before he put it on the market. He'd pay me for my time, and I had nothing else going on, so I agreed. I drove out on a Monday morning in late October. The house looked exactly how I remembered it from visiting as a kid, except worse. The paint was peeling, the porch steps were rotted in places, and the yard was completely overgrown. Inside, it smelled like dust and old wood. But the bones of the house were solid. It just needed some love. The first 2 days were fine. I cleaned out the main rooms, swept the floors, patched up some holes in the walls. At night, I'd sleep in my old bedroom on the second floor, the same room I used to stay in during childhood visits. It was nostalgic, in a bittersweet kind of way. The silence was the hardest part. There were no neighbors for at least a mile in any direction. No traffic, no city sounds. Just the wind and the occasional bird. At night, the darkness was absolute. No streetlights, no distant glow from a town. Just black. On the third night, I was lying in bed around midnight when I heard a car pull up to the house. I knew the sound because the gravel driveway made a distinctive crunching noise under tires. I got up and looked out the window. There was a vehicle parked at the end of the driveway with its headlights on, pointed toward the house. I couldn't make out the model because the lights were blinding. I stood at the window, waiting for someone to get out. Nobody did. The car just sat there, headlights on, engine running. After about 5 minutes, I started to feel uneasy. Nobody knew I was out here except my uncle and my mom. This wasn't a road where someone would just pull over for no reason. There was nothing around. I grabbed my phone and was about to call my uncle when the headlights turned off. The engine cut. And then, nothing. Complete darkness, complete silence. I couldn't see the car anymore. I pressed my face against the glass and tried to make out any shape, any movement in the driveway. I couldn't see anything. I told myself maybe it was someone who pulled in to turn around and just left while the lights were off, so I couldn't see the car moving. That's what I told myself. But something in my gut told me that car was still there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the bedroom with my back against the wall, watching the window and the door. Around 4 in the morning, I heard the engine start again. Headlights flicked on. The car reversed out of the driveway and drove away. I watched it go until the taillights disappeared down the road. I almost left the next morning. Almost. But in the daylight, everything felt silly. It was probably just some teenagers, or someone who got lost. I stayed and continued working. That was a mistake. The next night, I made sure every door and window was locked. I even pushed a heavy dresser against the front door. Around 1 in the morning, I heard the gravel again. The car was back. Same spot, same blinding headlights pointed right at the house. This time, after about 3 minutes, the driver's side door opened. A figure stepped out and stood next to the car. I couldn't see any features, because the headlights were behind them, turning them into nothing more than a silhouette. They just stood there, staring at the house, staring at my window. Then, they started walking toward the front door. I called the police immediately. I told them someone was approaching the house and I was alone. They said a unit would be there as fast as they could, but being 40 minutes from town, that meant I was on my own for a while. I heard footsteps on the porch, then knocking. Not frantic, not loud, just slow, even knocks. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Pause. This went on for what felt like forever. Then the knocking stopped, and I heard footsteps moving around the side of the house. They were checking windows. I could hear them trying the back door. I was upstairs, clutching a hammer I'd been using for repairs, my back against the wall, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps circled the entire house, and then stopped. When the police finally arrived about 35 minutes later, there was no car in the driveway and no one on the property. They did a full sweep of the grounds with flashlights. They found fresh footprints in the mud around the house, circling the entire perimeter. One officer told me the footprints stopped at the back porch, where there were marks on the doorframe consistent with someone trying to pry it open. I packed my things that night and left. I didn't even fold my clothes. I shoved everything into a bag and threw it in my car. I drove home at 3 in the morning with every light in the house still on behind me, and I didn't stop until I was back in the city. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel for the entire drive. The next morning, I called my uncle and told him everything. He was shaken. He called the local police department himself to follow up. They told him they'd increase patrols in the area, but with how rural it was, there wasn't much they could promise. My uncle asked a neighbor who lived about a mile down the road if they'd seen anything strange. The neighbor told him something that sent a chill through both of us. Apparently, over the past few months, there had been reports of a vehicle matching that description parked on different rural properties in the area late at night. Nobody had been caught. Nobody knew who was doing it. But the pattern was always the same. They targeted isolated houses, places that looked empty or had only one person inside. My uncle hired a professional crew to finish the repairs. He told them to go in groups, never alone, and never stay past dark. The house sold 2 months later to a young family. I never told them what happened. I don't know if that was the right thing to do, but I couldn't bring myself to relive it all again. I've thought about it a lot since then. Who drives out to an empty farmhouse in the middle of nowhere at 1 in the morning, parks, and tries to get inside? They came back the second night, which means they knew someone was there. They saw the lights on, they saw my car, and they came back anyway. That's the part that stays with me. They knew I was inside, and they still came. Whatever their intention was, it wasn't good. The footprints circling the house, the pry marks on the back door, the slow knocking. That wasn't someone looking for directions. That was someone testing the boundaries, seeing how far they could go before something stopped them. I just thank God the doors held, and the police got there when they did. I still have nightmares about that knocking. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Sometimes I hear it when I'm falling asleep, even in my apartment in the city, even with the doors locked and the lights on. My therapist says it's a trauma response. My brain replaying the moment it felt the most helpless. Maybe she's right. But on those nights, when I hear those phantom knocks, I always get up and check the door. Every single time. Some places aren't meant to be lived in alone, and some people are out there specifically looking for that. Someone left behind. Someone isolated. Someone in a place where no one else can hear them. If these stories taught us anything, it's that the scariest thing in the world isn't a ghost, a monster, or something supernatural. It's the sound of someone who shouldn't be there, breathing just above your ceiling, whispering your name through a locked door, or knocking slowly in the middle of the night, knowing you have nowhere to run. Stay safe out there. Lock your doors. Trust your instincts. And whatever you do, don't ignore the signs. Because by the time you realize you're not alone, it might already be too late.